Okay, so thank you for joining me today. Again, Alex, my name is Laura and I'm an instructional designer with Citi. I've been here since July of last year, so I'm the newest member of the team. Today, we're going to do a very quick overview of time management strategies and online teaching. This is one of our first Citi Spark sessions, which essentially means that it's scheduled for a half-hour format as opposed to a full hour. So it's intended to be a kind of more focused kind of look at, or a more focused topic with sort of strategies and tips that you can implement now in your online teaching. So since it's just the two of us plus the IDs, I'd like to make this more conversational if possible. So feel free to keep your mic on, interrupt, ask questions. I have a bit of interaction planned through a polling question, but we don't need to use that since it's just the two of us. Feel free to just use your mic or your chat if you want to respond or have questions. So let's dive right in. Skip over that polling question, but essentially I asked, in what areas of your online teaching do you find yourself spending the most time? And also, where would you like to save time in your online teaching?
So I will respond. I think I spend probably the most time, a good chunk of it is in grading, and I think that's where I would want to try to streamline that as well. But also I think probably just like in the prep part of it is a lot of time, like planning out, making sure everything is organized and clear for the students.
Yeah, those are two areas that I think we often find, and I also teach online and have been doing so for many years. Those are two areas where you really do, again, take up a lot of your time, right? Grading, providing meaningful feedback to your students, and also just getting everything ready to go, making sure everything is clearly explained and outlined for your students. So I'm going to provide you with some helpful tips and strategies to make those things more efficient, as well as some other areas that I think both myself and other faculty find time consuming. So hopefully some strategies you can implement today, and feel free again to interrupt, ask questions, or share your own any ways that you've also found been able to save time with any of these particular aspects of your online course. So learning objectives for today. We'll discuss in brief time-related differences between in-person and online courses. These are, of course, different animals. So we want to just briefly talk about how they differ. I will be listing out 6 time management strategies for the online classroom with some guidelines, sort of tips and tricks for how to implement or how to utilize them in your online class. And then if time, we'll all, discuss in a more organic conversational format our own strategies. So I brought this image in just to illustrate, I think, what are some of the common sort of expectations when it comes to teaching online and the consequences of that. So in the context of discussing the kind of essential differences between face-to-face and online teaching, particularly concerning faculty expectations and time commitment. So I brought this image in to illustrate the perception of online faculty as kind of the 24-hour professor, right? So if your students can access the course at any time of day, why shouldn't the professor also be accessible as well? Are all these student expectations, or are these expectations we put upon ourselves and our desire to be sort of responsive to our students' needs? So obviously this 24-hour professor model is not sustainable, and it does not preserve our sanity, right? So, and because the teaching is just one of many things we have to do throughout the week. So, how do we set boundaries and limits given that ever-present online sphere and its pull that I think we often find ourselves in at different hours of every day, right? So today we're going to briefly cover again those 6 strategies for time management, so that we won't become this tired professor, right? And they'll be, again, coupled with these strategies for implementation and quick tips as well. So that's sort of how we'll format it, running through those 6 sort of tips. So number 1, be prepared and ready to go. Obviously, it sounds like this is something you're already doing, Alex. And this may require a significant investment of time before your class starts. But I think what often faculty find when they spend more time preparing prior to day 1, that they end up saving time in the long run throughout the semester. So preparedness and course readiness are really important in terms of time management in my experience. So start early, right? And some ways you could do that, again, having these resources available prior to day 1 include, creating a video course tour. I've done this before, maybe a 5-10 minute kind of video sort of tour navigating through the course and its structure, showing your students where to find things and where they can submit work. Again, helps to prevent those questions about where do I post to here, where do I submit here? And you might include that in your Start Here or Read Me First module, and also in your first weeks of announcement. You can create that using Screencast-O-Matic among different screencasting tools, and Rush has access and can give you access to Screencast-O-Matic, so you can create those quite easily. It's a very easy tool to learn, so that's one option for you. I also recommend creating brief video tutorials, especially for big assignments like final projects or final papers, things that require students to complete work over a number of weeks. Creating brief kind of video tutorials, including your expectations and the assignment guidelines, again, can help prevent questions and confusion in the long run. So again, those can be like screencasting recordings, walking your students through what you're looking for. And with that, including examples, I'm down to point 3 here, of prior student work. Of course, with student permission, but I've often found that students want to see, what's an example of an A paper or an A, assignment. So if you include with permission those examples in your assignment guidelines, then they have a much better idea of how to approach their own, albeit with you stating you can't copy any portion of this assignment in your work. And then you can prevent those kinds of questions from being asked, like, what are you looking for? What do you want? That sort of thing that I think we often get as faculty. With that, and you might find that you're getting a lot of questions from your students, a lot of the same kinds of questions, right? So often if you're getting, at least two of the same questions from your students, chances are, more than 2 of your students have that, same question or confusion. So I recommend creating a frequently asked questions page. Add it to your Start Here module, share it during your first week or during your course tour, and refer to it in, say, your Q&A discussion forum, so that, again, students have a place to go first if they have a question before coming to you with an email. And that, again, I think saves time, saves you just living in your inbox responding to those questions. So with each of these recommendations, I provide a quick tip, and my quick tip for preparedness is reusing weekly announcements. If you teach a course from semester to semester or alternating semesters, I have often saved announcements from, as long as the course format remains pretty consistent, loaded those prior to the course starting, and then scheduled a release in advance. You might have to tweak that depending upon how the course goes, but if they're pretty standard kinds of to-do lists and introductions to the course content for that week, setting up those announcements in advance and reusing them can also save you time. Alex or Peg or Bronca, do you have any other suggestions in terms of preparedness that you would recommend, or things that you already do that you found to be useful?
I just always emphasize start earlier than you think you need to. It never fails that you start and then you think you're ahead of the game and then something else comes up and you're not.
Yeah.
So,
right.
But I absolutely love the video tutorials. I just think that's key.
Yeah, and it's, you know, as I'll talk about later, that's a good point. It's, you know, providing yourself as well as your students with different means of expressing or communicating content or answers also alleviates just that time-consuming task of reading and writing, right? Which is important, but not everything needs to be written in, you know, perfectly edited paragraphs. You can do videos, you can do audio recordings, things that can break up the monotony again of reading and writing in your online course. Another thing that's sort of related to the first point, right, because it has to do with preparedness, is my second kind of strategy, and that is be organized and be explicit, be clear to your students. And a lot of this is done with your syllabus, right, and what you have ready to go prior to day one. So not only does this save time answering questions, but it also reduces or eliminates the possibility of students, you know, contesting grades or other policies in your course later in the semester. If you have that all written out clearly at the start, right, and you require that students understand that those policies are enforced by, asking them to complete a syllabus quiz or a contract, which they, you know, electronically sign their name, then they are held to that policy, and then again, you can prevent those kinds of, you know, issues from being addressed or being having those come up at a later point in the semester, or at least make them less likely. So, you know, state your course policies clearly in your syllabus, including penalties for late work, etc. So again, you can prevent that question of, you know, when is this due? Can I hand it in late? That sort of thing. Just refer it back to the syllabus where that's explicitly stated. So yes, overthink your syllabus, right? It's very helpful to you in the long run. And that includes listing, you know, clear due dates, include the time and the time zone if needed, add to the course calendar, make sure you include as much information as possible about your assignments, when they're due, what material will be covered during those weeks. And I would recommend, if possible, and I know this is, there's varying degrees of implementation here at Rush, but adding a course calendar to the end of your syllabus, or at least adding it next to your syllabus in your Start Here module at the start of class is very important. Also, and this is really key for me and has been in my teaching, give students a reasonable response time for your response to emails. So standard is typically about 24 hours for weekdays, potentially longer on weekends if you really value your personal time away from your online class. But, you know, clearly state that in your syllabus. Make sure that students know that if they email you, don't email you again 3 hours later, but give you time to respond. Or state that in your instructor profile in Blackboard so that it's clearly communicated how long they can expect to wait to receive a response from you. And then pertaining to your course design, really important, again, to just organize your course, to make sure it's very as easy to navigate as possible, and that the format should remain pretty consistent over the duration of your course so students can get in a rhythm, know what to expect, and again, save you and them time in terms of having to show them where content is located or how to submit work. And again, just the quick tip, which I mentioned earlier, creating a syllabus quiz or contract, again, makes the onus upon the students to adhere to all of those policies so that they that is understood from the outset. Any other suggestions in terms of organization that you guys want to add to this?
Not me. I think you got them.
Okay. So let's jump ahead again, just to make sure we adhere to this half-hour format. We started a bit late, but I don't want to belabor any of these topics too much for the sake of time. So this is a really important one and has been for me, but I think also for a lot of faculty I've talked with here at Rush and elsewhere, the importance of being present in your course, but doing so on your own time and doing so that you're not again compromising yourself or your other competing priorities. So this is a tricky one for faculty, I know, because we want to be responsive to student needs, but we also don't want to overextend ourselves or compromise our other responsibilities or even our sanity. So the importance of instructor presence is obviously a best practice in online courses, but how do you set boundaries so that you can also protect your own time and space outside of your course? So I would say just a few sort of basic ways of approaching this. First of all, set your office hours, either at a certain weekly day and time or by appointment, and stick to a sort of schedule. Use a Q&A forum in your discussion board and require that students use it first before coming to you with questions by email or phone. That way, again, not only you would be responding to questions, but also students would be helping each other out so that you wouldn't be the only person that had to sort of facilitate the course, but you can involve your students in troubleshooting other students' needs as well. In terms of knowing yourself and your own ability to effectively manage your time, I would recommend allocating time in your week that you devote to a particular class. So for example, set grading days. Say you are not in clinic from 3 to 6 on a Tuesday, for example. And you feel like you're especially alert and your ability to be focused in your online course is really going to work out for that day and time. Set that time aside, communicate that to your students, tell them in your syllabus or in a post that I'm going to be grading work from last week on Tuesdays from 3 to 6, so that they know when to expect their grade and feedback. And again, you can hopefully prevent those questions like, when am I going to get my grade on such and such, right? And how did I do on this? If you communicate that expectation and stick to that schedule, then they'll learn to anticipate that as well. Same goes for discussion participation, days and times. I like to set aside a little bit of time each day after a discussion gets going to participate in discussion, and we'll have more guidelines for that in a moment. But also the importance of communicating that to your students when you're going to be active in those discussions, how active you're going to be in those discussions, so they can learn that to anticipate your presence in the course, right? But that it will happen at the times that you've determined and not on their schedule, right? Again, this is really tricky, hard to do, because as faculty who care about our teaching, we want to be present. We want to be there for our students, but we also want to, we don't want to overextend ourselves, right? We want to also keep our own other things afloat without compromising them. So I know that this is tricky, but I found again that setting that schedule and clearly outlining those expectations does help to adhere to them. Any other suggestions, or Alex, any questions you have about that?
No questions. I like the idea of, like I try to schedule out grading times and that works okay.
Yeah.
As far as like other responsibilities coming up, I feel like that's always something that gets pushed back. So I like the idea of communicating that to students as like a way to hold myself accountable too.
Yeah.
Sounds like I might try doing that actually. I like that.
Yeah, and I know that's hard to anticipate at the start of the semester, right? Because you don't know how your schedule will change. So maybe not include that in your syllabus, maybe, communicate that, quarterly or however you want to do that with your students so that if your schedule does change, they can know when to anticipate those grades and feedback.
I've also found it really useful to put it in my calendar and to block off, like I block off a couple of hours a week at different times so that I can focus on projects. So I might, Wednesday from 2 to 5, I might have it blocked off, even though technically I don't have any meetings or anything, but I block it off anyway, just because I need that time for me.
Yeah, that's also a great suggestion.
Yeah, I'm trying that in this new year as well, Peg, like trying to time block, scheduling time for projects, because I totally agree that
I feel like I'm cheating, and when I first started doing it, I felt really guilty, and yet it's been so effective.
Yeah. Absolutely. Both really good suggestions.
So another suggestion that I have for time management, so I know Laura, you had mentioned earlier about saving a lot of your announcements and repeating them. You can also do that for your feedback, for like your discussions and your assignments. Just have like, 3 different like tiers of responses, like, students that have really responded great or, did wonderfully in their assignment, comment, like, great job. And then one's like, oh, you're on the right track. And the other one's like, I think you need to get in touch with me kind of thing, different response feedbacks. That way you can just copy and paste, depending on how intricately you need to have your feedback to your students, for the assignments, but it definitely helps in discussions. I know sometimes we get in this, we really want to comment on every single student, but sometimes if you just kind of post a general response to the entire discussion and save it, it helps so much with your time.
Yeah, that's so true. And we could do a whole hour on time management strategies in your discussion forums, right? Both in facilitating and also grading them. Those are really good suggestions, Branka. I often find that it's super helpful if I work with 2 screens. While I'm grading on one, I keep my feedback based upon, again, the quality of the post on the other screen, right? So that I can utilize or copy and paste some of that and then tweak it or customize it to that particular student while I'm posting grades on the other. Makes it much more efficient in my experience. So my 4th suggestion, and again, a lot of these are interrelated, right? And we could go on at different links about how so, but my 4th recommendation would be to be strategic. And we've already talked about strategy pertaining to different aspects of online teaching. But I brought in a few points pertaining to different aspects of your online teaching, whether it be with your developing your learning content, creating and grading assessments, developing activities. So in terms of learning content, I would recommend, again, we spend a lot of time creating our presentations, creating 40 or 50 slides with a lot of data or a lot of text in them. Those can be really valuable. And again, we can reuse those from semester to semester. But I would recommend, as you're editing or developing new learning content, I would recommend as much as possible, and I'm guilty of not doing this too, is to streamline your presentations. Try to trim them down or try to use fewer words, on specific points and elaborate verbally in your, say, lecture recordings or in your synchronous sessions. It more easily conforms to Mayer's theory of cognitive, theory of multimedia, where we don't want to exceed students' cognitive load by giving them too much to look at, too much to read, and too much to listen to at once. It actually it is not conducive to learning, but rather, include fewer words, fewer images to illustrate them, and elaborate verbally in your presentation. It will save you time when you're developing, or it can, and it can make that learning experience more valuable for your students. And we could have an entire workshop on that theory itself and how to implement it. Assessments. Ask yourself, can a learning objective be satisfied by, say, a quick formative assessment, like a 3-question knowledge check quiz that's auto-graded rather than a longer written assignment? This isn't to say that written assignments aren't valuable, because they are, but perhaps you have a lower level objective that relates to students understanding, or can you satisfy that with just a quick quiz that you set up prior to the course starting, that has feedback already set up to be automatically given to students, as opposed to you reading and responding at length to 50 papers, 50 reflections, also which are valuable. But again, I would be strategic in terms of how many of those kinds of assignments you require, and where you can use different types of assessments to help you achieve that same objective. Activities, aligning your comments and grading with the learning objectives. I am guilty myself of, wanting to respond to everything I read. If I'm particularly excited by a student's paper, maybe, mark it up, all the grammatical errors, or share funny asides in my comments. But if you don't have time to do that, and you have 30 papers to grade, for example, maybe just make sure your comments align specifically with the learning objectives for that particular activity, and that you respond only to those things, where a student has met that objective and where they need help meeting that objective. Omitting that extraneous feedback can save you time in your grading. And it also helps to make sure your course is aligned and that students understand, how the assignments match the objectives. And then discussion forums, spend, as I mentioned before, a lot of amount of time, dedicated time posting replies. My rule of thumb, and that could be different for you guys, is in large classes, I like to respond to about 1/3 of students each week, say in classes of 30 or more, respond to 10 in the discussion. And then maybe next week, and this is a sort of a kind of mock-up of how you might do that if you're keeping track of it in a spreadsheet, respond to this, another 10, and so on, so that if you don't have time to respond to every single student this week, and that's almost an unreasonable expectation for large classes, alternate that so that throughout the semester, each student gets at least a couple or more replies from you in your forums, and everyone feels like that you've been equally present and responsive to their posts. I found that to be super helpful to me, keeping track of that in this kind of spreadsheet format so that I can better strategize how I'm going to interact in those forums. Any other suggestions, questions?
I put a couple in the chat, Laura.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. Well, for grading grammar usage and mechanics errors, I only do that on the first page for assignments. So if it's a long paper, I figure by the time they're with us, they should have a good handle on it. I know that that's not realistic, but I'm also not a grammar teacher. So I make note of the errors on the first page and then just tell them to use grammar, and I deduct points accordingly. But I don't correct every single grammar mistake on every single page.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And then,
we're not grammar teachers for sure. Go
no,
ahead.
and then when it comes to discussion board, I love doing group responses and just sort of, I read through all of them and then I'll talk about how they responded as a whole class and highlight certain students who made particularly salient points.
Yeah. Yeah, those are both great suggestions. There's lots of time-saving strategies, again, we could talk about with respect to discussions, right? So maybe that should be a future workshop topic. All right, we are at the 30-minute mark, so I'm just going to quickly jump through the last two. My fifth recommendation is something I know that is often of concern to faculty, and that is how to efficiently and effectively utilize technology in your course. So I would just say, be smart with your tech and your implementation of new tech. So ask yourself, do you need that new tool? Does that new tool meet an instructional need or facilitate achievement of an unmet learning objective? I would say if so, and you're really excited to use it, by all means, go for it. If not, maybe consider delaying or discarding it, or selecting one tool per semester that you'd like to play with, because it does take some time for both you and the student to learn how to use it, right? So, don't require use of a new tech tool for a grade, right? That can be a potential nightmare unless, again, you have the support services that are built into the course and provided by the university to help you utilize it. And again, make sure those tech tools are accessible, adaptable, and they have good user guides for troubleshooting, both for yourself and for your students. A quick tip, I'll just jump really quickly into that is, we've talked about it prior or earlier on in today's conversation, but instead of requiring a written discussion post for your discussion forums, of which you may have to read 50 of them, or hopefully not that many, let students post a short video in which they discuss their answers or a short voice recording. That can save you time, and it can also alleviate the monotony of just reading and posting replies or written replies to every discussion post. City has a really great video tutorial on how to give audio feedback or video feedback in Blackboard, which you can check out on our website. And I have a link to it here, but I can share that with you after the session if you like, or feel free to reach out to us if you can't find the link. And then lastly, we are at the 32-minute mark. And this is, again, a difficult one, especially hard for faculty who really like to have a lot of control over the course and the online classroom. Be open to relinquishing control and letting your students lead. And this is a kind of preview to one of our workshops that we're having led by Peg, who's here today, next month on student-led learning. And I'm not sure, is that the exact topic or title, Peg?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And it's just going to be talking about essentially what you've got on here, how to make them the focus and put the work on them.
Yeah.
It makes our lives much easier when we're guiding as opposed to leading. It's much, much more effective.
Absolutely. And so I won't dive for the sake of time and also for the sake of letting Peg lead that discussion. I'm not going to get too far into it, but I've got a couple strategies here, like allowing students or groups to lead discussion forums as opposed to you being the facilitator, but let them be the facilitator, and assign those at the start of the semester so that you know each week who's going to be leading a particular discussion. They might also develop mini lectures on a topic that you could help break up your own lecture by letting students lecture for 20 minutes on a particular subtopic for that day. You can be there to make corrections, right, and help facilitate, but you don't have to create the content in that case. And one quick tip that I really like is using a formative assessment, and I have that here, to request that students, perhaps as a part of an exit ticket develop quiz or test questions around a specific topic, and maybe you use one or more of those questions in a quiz or exam scheduled for later in the semester. Again, this allows them to contribute to their learning and the assessment of their learning, and helps you as you do. So you don't have to develop so many quiz questions on your own. So again, simplify, don't overcomplicate, don't overthink, and take advantage of your instructional designers at City. We're here to help should you need any suggestions or want suggestions about time management in your online teaching. So we are at 35-minute mark, exceeded our 30-minute allotment by a bit, but if you guys want to just offer any other suggestions in terms of time management or best practices that you like to implement in your online classroom, feel free to share them now. All right, so it doesn't look like there's any other feedback, maybe also because we've exceeded our time and we need to jump off. But I want to thank you all for attending this short workshop on time management. Here are my references, some great resources here where you can dive deeper into this subject. And then our email and then my email should you want any help about how to implement these and other strategies in your online classroom.